Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Radha Giradhari Gopi Jana Radha Giradhari Gopi Jana Radha Giradhari Gopi Jana Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Ramjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Yamuna Tira Kunja Vihari Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Radha Giradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Radha Giradhari Yashoda Nandana Raja Jana Ramjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Kunja Vihari Jaya Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Uttara Sata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. His confounder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Uttara Sata Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Vishnupada Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jaya Vishnupada Srila Satyananda Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai. Jaya Vishnupada Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jaya Shri Rupa Sanata Bhatta Raghunath Das Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Sat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Devi Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Dev Ki Jai. Jasadev Ki Jai. Anantapura Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Rathraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Iskar Bharma Guru Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai. Gora Premanande. Hare. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru Shri Guranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayana Namaskritya.
Narayana Namaskritya.
Naram Jaiva Narottamam.
Naram Jaiva Narottamam.
Devam Saraswatam Vyasam.
Devi Saraswati Vyasa.
Sito Jayam Yuridayat.
Jaya Pudire.
Nastapreshu Abhadreshu.
Nastapadeshu Padreshu.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya.
Nityam Bhagavata Seva.
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke.
Bhagavati Uttama
Bhaktir Bhakti Naistiki.
Bhakti Naistiki.
Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances under the personality of Godhead Narayan, and under Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, under Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and under Srila Vyasdev, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by the rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. In loving service under the personality of Godhead, who is praised for transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Okay, good morning, everybody. Today's December 29th, 2024, and we'll be reading Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 25, the descriptions of the characteristics of King Puranjana, and we will be reading text 35. Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Naranaryaschamana.
Naranaryaschamana.
Suptayamai Yagati.
Suptayamai Jagati.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Iti Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Naranaryaschamana.
Naranaryaschamana.
Suptayamai Yagati.
Suptayamai Jagati.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Iti Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Naranaryaschamana.
Naranaryaschamana.
Suptayamai Yagati.
Suptayamai Jagati.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Okay, please chant.
Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Iti Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Naranaryaschamana.
Naranaryaschamana.
Suptayamai Jagati.
Suptayamai Yagati.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim.
Ete Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Iti Sakaya Sakyo Me.
Naranaryaschamana.
Naranaryaschamana.
Suptayamai Jagati.
Suptayamai Yagati.
Nagoyam Palayam.
Nagoyam Palayam Purim. Okay, let's do word for word. Okay, Ete,
Ete
all these.
all these.
Sakaya,
Sakaya.
male friends.
Male friends.
Sakya,
Sakya.
female associates.
Female associates.
Me,
Me.
my.
Ma.
Naraha,
Nara.
men.
Me.
Naryaha,
Narya.
women.
Women.
Cha,
Cha.
and
And
Manada,
Manada.
oh, very respectful one.
Oh, very respectful one.
Suptayam,
Suptayam.
while sleeping.
Was we.
Mai,
Mighty.
I am. Jagarti,
Jagarti.
keeps awake.
Keeps away.
Nagaha,
Naga.
it's snake.
Snake.
Ayam,
Ayam.
this.
This.
Palayan,
Alayam,
protecting
protecting,
Lorim,
Lorim,
this city.
city.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. My dear gentlemen, all these men and women with me are known as my friends, and the snake, who always remains awake, protects this city even during my sleeping hours. So much I know. I do not know anything beyond this. Okay, please repeat. My dear gentlemen,
My dear gentlemen,
all these men and women with me
all these men and women with me
are known as my friends,
are known as my friends,
and the snake,
and the snake,
who always remains awake,
who always remain awake,
protects this city even during my sleeping hours.
protects this city even during my sleeping hours.
So much I know.
So much I know.
I do not know anything beyond this.
I do not know anything beyond this.
Court. Paranjana inquired from the woman about those 11 men and their wives and the snake. The woman gave a brief description of them. She was obviously without full knowledge of her surrounding men and women and the snake. As stated before, the snake is the vital force of the living being. This vital force always remains awake even when the body and the senses become fatigued and do not work. Even in the state of unconsciousness, when we sleep, the snake or the life force remains intact and awake. Consequently, we dream when we sleep. When the living entity gives up this material body, the vital force still remains intact and is carried to another material body. This is called transmigration, or change of the body. And we have come to know this process as death. Actually, there is no death. The vital force always exists with the soul, and when the soul is awakened from so-called sleep, he can see his 11 friends, or the active senses, and the mind with their various desires, wives. The vital life force remains. Even during our sleeping hours, we can understand by virtue of our breathing process that the snake lives by eating the air that passes within this body. Air is exhibited in the form of breathing, and as long as breath is there, one can understand that a sleeping man is alive. Even when the gross body is asleep, the vital force remains active and alive to protect the body. Thus, the snake is described as living and eating air to keep the body fit for life. Om Madhyanantaranasya Vijnanjana Shalakaya Chakshuramitam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakara Maya Karati Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padkamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Saragana Raganatham Vitam Tam Sajipam Savadekam Savadvikam Parjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Malita Shri Vishakam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jakapate Gopesha Gopeka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Japti Kanchana Rangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Siti Devi Pranamami Muripriye Vanchakalpa Taribhischa Kripa Sindhu Devacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasani Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The verse again. De Sakaya Sakyome Nara Naras Chamanada Sutaya Maya Gati Nadoyam Halayam Guru. My dear gentlemen, all these men and women with me are known as my friends, and the snake, who always remains awake, protects this city even during my sleeping hours. So much I know. I do not know anything beyond this. Okay, so in this verse, we're continuing this allegory that's been going on in the last, that we've been reading about the last few weeks. King Paranjana is talking to the beautiful girl, who she represents the intelligence, and he's asking her question. So like 27. Yeah, in verse 27, he says, "My dear lotus-eyed, who are those 11 strong bodyguards with you? And who are those 10 specific servants? Who are those women following the 10 servants? And who is the snake that is preceding you? And so she starts answering in verse 33. She says, O best of human beings, I do not know who has begotten me. I cannot speak to you perfectly about this. Nor do I know the names or the origin of the associates with me. O great hero, we only know that we are existing in this place. We do not know what will come after. Indeed, we are so foolish we do not care to understand who has created this beautiful place for our residence. My dear gentlemen, all these men and women with me are known as my friends, and the snake who always remains awake protects this city, even during my sleeping hours. So much I know. I do not know anything beyond this. So the girl, she's the intelligence, and the men and the women are the senses and their sense objects. So the 11 senses, we have our knowledge acquiring senses, which are our ears, our eyes, our nose, our tongue, our skin. Then we have our working senses, the voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. So that's 10. And then the 11th one is the mind. And so that's who these men and women are. It's the senses and their sense objects. So she says she knows nothing beyond this. And that's most people. Most people in the world, they don't know anything beyond their senses. Nor can they really conceive of anything beyond their senses. There's that saying, if it feels good, do it, right? That's because people are just satisfying their senses. Because they're controlled by that, and they can't really see anything beyond that and see any reason to not do that. And if you kind of stray from this path of, working hard so you can enjoy just a little bit. I remember, my mom would say things like, well, that's just the way life is. That's just the way life is. Join the real world. She used to also say, the world's not just going to stop so you can get off, right? All because I, thought it seemed pretty strange that we would work so hard at things that we don't like to do in order to just enjoy just a little bit on the weekend, maybe go see a movie or, have a nice meal, or, maybe not even that. Maybe you have to catch up on the laundry and you have to, take the kids to practice or whatever. But it just seemed like a really ridiculous setup to me that this is the way we're living, but that's just the way life is. That's what my mother would say. And so we could see people also not being able to look beyond their senses when you look at racism, right? People, they just see that someone's different than them. And they don't really use their intelligence to understand, oh, this is a human being just like me. They're motivated by mostly the same things, which is, the desire to love and be loved, the desire to be safe, the desire to be clothed and fed and housed. That's generally what most people are trying to do. But because people can't see beyond their senses, they just see this person's different than me. And so then they're scared and they become antagonistic in some way. So we need to use our intelligence to go beyond our senses. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, in the 4th chapter, or in the 3rd chapter, the working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And the soul is even higher than the intelligence. So you can see there's a little bit of a hierarchy there. So I'm going to read just the end of that purport. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul, and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by the complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So we need to use our intelligence. We need to engage our intelligence to kind of rein in those senses. Because if we just follow what our senses are telling us, most of the time it doesn't end up in a good place for us. That's because we can't really trust our mind, and we can't really trust our senses. So a couple of years ago, I was invited by these ladies. They like to invite people from like different faiths and like have them come to lunch. And they usually try to do this around Mother's Day. And so they invited me one year, actually two years in a row they invited me. I think I brought Shanta Mataji and Jamuna with me. And they had met us, at this restaurant. And we were a little getting anxiety, wondering like, how are we gonna, not eat anything at the restaurant without seeming, like ungrateful, because she kept saying she wanted to buy us lunch, Well, it turned out that was the appearance day of Lord Nrsimhadev, and so we were fasting anyway. So we had like this great excuse, it's a fasting day. And so naturally, they wanted to know, well, why are you fasting? And so I tell them the story of Lord Nrsimhadev, and this lady just sort of like looks at me like, oh, so you believe that, huh? You believe that? And she seemed particularly disbelieving and dubious about the fact that, he had a lion head and a man body. And so I said to her, well, do you believe in God? She said, yes. I said, do you believe that God is all powerful? She said, yes. I said, do you believe that God made, all the animals, all the people? She said, yes. I said, so is it really that far of a stretch that God, who made lions and also made man, could present himself as half lion and half man? And that made her think a little bit. But I don't think it made her a believer. But I mean, if you can use your intelligence to realize, okay, if I believe that, God made all these things, Krishna made all these things, it's not very far-fetched that he could take on a form that combined two of those things that he's already made, right? So in the previous text, this beautiful girl that King Braj is talking to, she admits her ignorance, her lack of knowledge. So what is knowledge? So knowledge is sometimes said, as the ability to discern what is matter and what is spirit, what is temporary and what is eternal. And also to understand what our position as a spirit soul is. So the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter says, let's see. Okay, yeah, in the 13th chapter it says, humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical research for the absolute truth. All these things I declare to be knowledge. And besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So that's what the Bhagavad Gita talks about, what is knowledge. And all of these things are not particularly valued in our larger society, right? I mean, if you just think about, the people that are ruling our country right now or are about to rule, they don't really have many of these qualities. The one that really stood out to me is the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, right? I mean, like my mother said, well, that's just the way life is, right? People don't really perceive that cycle is something that is not good. That's just the way life is, right? I think people just they just accept whatever condition that they're in, and we know this to be true, without realization that we don't need to keep going through that cycle, right? But they're not using their intelligence to fix the largest problem that they have, which is birth, old age, disease, and death. They're using their intelligence to figure out how can I gratify my senses more, right? What is the best bang for my buck that I can get? What streaming service can I subscribe to? What what skill can I learn to help me find a good mate? These kinds of things. Instead of addressing the huge elephant in the room, which is we're all going to die. We all have disease. We're all going to get old. And so, yeah, that's what knowledge is, the perception of the evil of birth, old age, disease, and death. Also, at the end of that verse, it says, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical research for the absolute truth. Now, the general mass of people, they don't subscribe to that, right? They don't see the importance of self-realization. Some might even think it's self-indulgent, right? Or you're just being selfish. You're not contributing to society. You're just, worried about, you're finding yourself, right? That was a big thing that people did in the I think, like the 60s and the 70s, and I don't really hear so much about it anymore, but it's still there. People say, oh, I'm going to find myself, right? And so people perceive this to be selfish. But really, if someone's truly trying to find themselves, they should end up finding out what their constitutional position is, which is a part and parcel of the Lord, a part and parcel of Krishna, an eternal spirit soul. So, in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. The next verse, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So right there, the Bhagavad Gita tells us, one, we're eternal, and two, to death. When we leave this body, we're going into another body. Much to the chagrin of the people that subscribe to remember YOLO, you only live once, right? That was a big thing that people were saying, I think in the early 2000s maybe. Everybody said YOLO, and then they would do something really stupid. You only live once. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. You've probably done that stupid thing many times. So one thing is that people need to learn the difference between like a live body and a dead body. So if you look at the medical world, there's kind of been this continual revisioning about what death means, right? For a while, it was just, if they're still and they're not breathing, then they're dead. But so many people, they ended up getting buried alive, right? So much so that they used to make these coffins that had a string in it that went up to the surface and had a little bell. So if you got buried alive, you could ring the little bell and they could come and get you out. Now, that wasn't, in mass production, but it did exist. And that's because they didn't quite understand what death meant. More recently, that means, your heart stopped, you're cold, you're not breathing. Except for now they've found people that, say they fell through the ice in a pond, they're cold, their heart stopped, they're not breathing. But they found if they warm these people up, sometimes they'll come back to life, right? They'll be able to bring them back. And so then they revised it to, okay, well, you're not dead until you're warm and dead, right? And so then there's like, okay, well, if you're not breathing and you're warm and your heart's not beating and you have no brain activity, okay, then you're dead. But then there's people that are on life support, right? And their heart's beating, they have little to no brain activity, they're warm, and they're breathing mechanically, they're being forced to breathe. And sometimes those people are still living, and sometimes they're not, right? So we can keep that body alive artificially, but the person's no longer there, because what makes death is when that jiva soul leaves that body, right? But medical science doesn't say that, right? They're like, no, it's when you stop breathing, it's all about the body, right? But actual death is about the soul leaving that body and going to another body or going back to the spiritual world. So our mind and our senses, they lie to us. We can't trust them because they're imperfect. I think I talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago, but one example I thought was a good example was when you're going and hanging out your laundry and on the line, and it's really cold out, and you go to take it back in and you're touching them and you're like, wait, is this dry or is it still wet? And you can't tell, right? It's because our senses are imperfect. We can't tell. Is that just cold or is it wet? Also, our senses are very imperfect. We know eyewitness testimony is the least reliable form of testimony, right? Because people get confused quite easily. And so we must train our senses through sadhana, and we want to engage those senses, use our intelligence to engage those senses in a higher taste. Because once our senses are engaged in something that's better, those lower sense pleasures are just not appealing anymore. And I know this from experience. I used to love, just like really terrible junk food, just really, really liked it. And can't offer that stuff to Krishna. So I don't really eat that stuff anymore. But one time, usually I go shop at the Sprouts. They have a pretty decent selection of food there, and mostly healthy. They have a few junk foods, but it's nothing like, when you go to like Fry's or something, And so a while back, a devotee gave me some gift cards that he had for Fry's. I think it was for Fry's or Albertsons. It's one of the big grocery stores. And so I went, my godbrother and I went there to get stuff, and he kept saying, well, I want this, and it was like stuff we had at Sprouts. And I said, well, we have Fry's money. We don't have Sprouts money, because it was really difficult to find like good, healthy food there. Everything was just laden with, it was just complete junk food. And in the past, that would have appealed to me, and I would have like loaded up my cart and said, yeah, all right, let's have some Doritos and, some soda or something like that. And now I had like no desire at all to get any of those things. And it was just really kind of eye-opening to see how my tastes have become engaged by that higher thing, and now no longer wanted, Doritos and soda, right? And the same with, intoxication. I spent a lot of years of my life, struggling with intoxication. And that was something that was very difficult for me through most of my life. And at that time, my consciousness was so low that taking that intoxication actually sort of like raised me up a little bit, right? But now after, a short time of practicing Krishna consciousness, my consciousness is raised just a little bit to the point where the idea of taking intoxication is like, why would I do that? That would take me from up here and bring me right back down here, and so the desire to do that's no longer there. And so, in the past, my senses would tell me, no, you want that stuff, that's bad for me. Even though I intellectually knew it was bad for me, my senses told me I wanted it anyway. But now I know better, and I have my senses engaged in much better things. So I wanted to end with a few stories that were more fun, just sort of like, had a little theme of imperfect senses, although most of these take place in the spiritual world, so maybe they're just play acting if they have imperfect senses. But the first story I thought of was the Agastya demon, right? The big snake. And so Krishna and his cowherd friends, they're just out playing, and the boys see this big, huge serpent. I mean, so huge, he says his mouth is open, and he's there, and he wants to eat the boys so he can get to Krishna. He wants to get to Krishna, whether that means eating the boys or not, doesn't matter, but he wants to get to Krishna. And so he lays on the path, and this is like miles high, looks like a giant cave, right? And some of the boys, they know, like it's a big serpent, and some of them seem like they don't really know. But they're like, hey, let's go check that out. Let's go walk in his mouth, right? Now, most people's senses would be saying like, hey, don't do that. Don't walk in the mouth of a giant serpent. But they decided to do that because they knew. They said, well, Krishna will save us if anything happens. Krishna will save us. And so, and they walk right into this big giant serpent's mouth. And sure enough, he's a big giant serpent, and all the boys end up kind of like passing out or dying. I don't remember if they passed out or died. It was a little bit unclear, but sure enough, then Krishna, he's like, okay. So he goes in there to save his friends, and he does by becoming so big that the serpent kind of suffocates and he dies, and all the boys are okay. And so the reason I told that story is just because anybody's senses would be telling them, hey, don't do that, don't go in there. There's even a part where there's something like, smell that gross fishy smell, that's his guts, right? So they know this is not a good place for them to. I suppose they just want some adventure. Okay, so one of the other stories I wanted to talk about was one of my favorite stories, very sweet. One day, Radha, she normally would go to the Surya Kund and do a puja there every day. And Jatila, her mother-in-law, she stopped her because she's, like, you're spending too much time away from the house. She's always trying to stop her from seeing Krishna. You know, she was married to her son, so she didn't want her running off. And so she stopped her. And so Radha, of course, she was very sad. She wanted to go and she wanted to see Krishna. And so she's just crying, and she decides to make a beautiful garland for Krishna. She makes this beautiful garland for Krishna. And Vrinda Devi, she is thinking, okay, let me get this garland for Krishna. So she gives it to Subal. She knows Subal is Krishna's friend, and that they're close, and that she can give him the garland and he'll give it to Krishna. So Subal comes and he gets the garland and he gives it to Krishna. And Krishna, he's also said he's pining away, he wants to see Radha. And so he's saying, I must see Radha, like he's got the garland now, he's just being more intensely just saying, I must see her, I want to see her, please, you must do something. And Subal's telling Krishna, look, it's like the middle of the day, it's just like really, it's a bad time for her to be sneaking out, like people are going to see us. It's just not, I don't know. And so Krishna says, well, I'm gonna drown myself if I can't see Radha. He's just in so much distress. So Subal, he doesn't want his friend to be in distress. He wants to bring pleasure to his friend. And so he makes a plan. And so his plan, he goes to Radha's house, and Jatila, she's sitting outside. She is kind of like guarding the doorway. And so Subal, right before he gets in front of her, he kind of like sets down, he's carrying a calf with him, he sets down his calf and sort of like pinches it, so it takes off running into the property, into Radha's property in the house. And so he goes over to Jatila and he says, oh, hey, I lost my calf. Do you think you could go in there and see if he's in there somewhere? And Jatila's like, says to him, well, I just had my lunch. I'm not going and running around in there looking for your calf. You just go ahead in there. And so Subal's like, all right, great. So he runs in there all the way into the inner quarters to where Radha is. And so Radha, she's lamenting, she's wanting to see Krishna. And so Subal, who looks very much like Radha, he's got the same complexion, the same build, he's a young boy. And so he tells her, look, here, let's swap clothes. I'll give you my cow herding clothes. You give me your sari, and then you can leave. She's like, well, how am I going to do this? And he said, just take the calf, just hold it up like this, and you just walk out. And when you walk past Jatila, just say, oh, mother, I've got my calf. Thank you. So she does this. And she does this, and because Jatila's senses are imperfect, she doesn't notice. Hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. That's not Subal. I always wondered too, like did she put on a funny voice, or maybe the voice is here the same. Anyway, so she makes it out of the house, and she gets all the way to where Krishna is, and when she sees Krishna, who we know has perfect senses, but in this case, I think maybe there's a little bit of play acting going on. He doesn't realize that it's Radha. He thinks this is friend Subal, and so he's still lamenting, and he's just crying and lamenting and saying how much he needs to, he wants to see Radha, and how distraught he is that Subal didn't bring her back. And so Radha sort of wanted to play a little bit. Doesn't say, oh no, Radha. She says, oh, well, why don't we go get Chandravali instead? This other gopi. And, like any girl, maybe checking to see what her lover would do when presented with another lady. And Krishna says, what? No, herd can't satisfy the desire for milk, right? Which I thought was very sweet. And then at that point, Radha, she's just so overjoyed. She sort of embraces him, and then they just have a nice time together. They're reunited and just enjoying each other's company. So that's a very sweet story where some the imperfectness of senses can be used for pleasure, right? Even though we know Krishna has senses. Let's see. So a few more minutes. I'll tell one more. I really like this story. It's a little similar. So there's this big lake called the Manasi Ganga. It's a huge lake. And one day all the gopis were on the one side of the lake, and they had all kinds of pots with like yogurt and sweets and butter. And so they're carrying all these big pots. And they need to get across the lake. And the lake's like 8 miles wide. It's a big lake. So it's not like they can, swim across it, and probably walking around it would take way too long. So they see a boatman in the lake, and they call him over, and they're like, please, will you take us across the lake? So the boatman says, okay, well, I can take you across the lake, but I see you have some sweets there. How about you give me some sweets, and I'll take you across the lake? I said, okay, sure. So they give him some sweets. And they start going a little bit. He starts rowing, and suddenly he stops. And he says, I think you need to give me some more sweets. So just, okay. So we give him more sweets. Then he starts rowing again. And he stops again. And he says, yeah, I think I need some more. And so they give him like some butter, some sweets, some yogurt, and he's just like, just eats so much. And then after he's done eating, he's very tired. He just ate all these sweets, a bunch of butter, some yogurt. So he says, I need to take a rest. I'm very tired. I've been rowing all day. I need to take a rest. And so the gopis are getting pretty irritated by this time. And so he's taking a nap, and they're just kind of like, just very irritated. So finally he wakes up, starts rowing a little bit, and stops again. And he says, oh, you know what, the boat's just too heavy. You girls need to throw your pots overboard. So they throw the remaining butter and sweets and everything, throws them overboard, and now they're just kind of exasperated. Oh, goodness. And so he starts rowing again, and he stops again. He says, no, you know what, the boat is still too heavy. You need to throw off your jewelry. The girls are just, wow, they're just beside themselves now. So they throw off their jewelry. They don't want to. What are they going to do? They need to get across the lake. And they also threaten to throw him overboard. They're getting pretty testy. Suddenly, this big storm comes, and like this big heavy storm clouds, and the water's getting very choppy, and they're scared. And Radha, she starts like clinging to the boatman, and the other gopis are kind of looking at her. What are you doing? You just hanging on to this man, we don't know him. But Radha, as soon as she started clinging to the boatman, suddenly she just became very calm and very happy. And then the gopis are also confused. They're like, okay, what's going on here? And so Radha, she reaches in the boatman's clothes or whatever and pulls out the flute. Because the boatman was actually Krishna. And so then, of course, the storm stops. And they end up getting to the other side of the lake. And so, again, another story of imperfect senses, but for the purpose of enjoyment. And so I think we'll just end there. So my whole purport of this class is just to engage our senses in Krishna's service, and all will be well. All of our senses will be gratified and satisfied along the way. all will be well as long as we just engage our senses in the service of Krishna in some way. So, okay, so we'll end there. Is there any comments or questions, or you want to tell a story that would maybe some imperfect senses? No? All right, well, we'll just end there then. Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Okay.